Sister, Sister by Cydoniia. The lights inside the Carousel boutique were dimmed as Rarity worked. Her hooves were up on the table, eyes glancing over a large sheet of fabric as her horn guided the pencil across the surface. The only noises in the building were the occasional displeased hmms when a pattern didn't turn out as planned, or excited whinnies when it did go as planned. Time flew by as Rarity worked, but then she finally glanced up at the clock. All the pins held in her mouth tumbled to the ground.
"Oh my!"
she mumbled to herself, trotting up the stairs 2 at a time. Upstairs from the boutique and the workroom was their home. It was quaint, though, of course, decorated to perfection, and the colors of the room changed with the seasons. Now that it was winter, the entire building had been decked out in a rose taupe and an ash grey. Only the finest shades for this season, Rarity thought, as she came to a stand in front of the one door that simply did not work with the decor. Rarity had allowed Sweetie Belle to decorate her own room however she chose, and a decision she was coming to regret. Now, every time she went past her room, Rarity had to face a pink door with a large, gaudy purple letters spelling out her younger sister's name. The designer inside Rarity cringed, but the elder sister in her simply knocked twice on the door with her hoof.
"Sweetie Belle!"
Rarity asked, before her horn lit up, magic turning the doorknob.
"Sweetie Belle, darling, it's time for school."
Rarity entered the darkened room, her first action to open the blinds with a glance. Outside wasn't much lighter, but it allowed to see in the room. Underneath the bed, in summer colors of all things, was a small bundle.
"Come now, Sweetie Belle,"
Rarity coaxed, coming to a standstill beside the bed. The lump in the bed shuffled and then sneezed. Rarity leaned forward to hook her horn under the covers, lifting it up so she could peek underneath. Sweetie Belle stared up at her through half-lit eyes.
"Hey, Rarity,"
she said, voice cracking. The younger unicorn turned her head away to cough in her hoof.
"Are you all right?"
Rarity asked, concern pulling her brow as she removed her head from the covers. Rarity used her magic to pull the blanket back over Sweetie Belle's head, who yelped and tried to huddle herself in.
"Come now,"
Rarity said in a stern, motherly voice, placing her hoof just beneath Sweetie Belle's horn. As she did so, Rarity flinched back. The heat was a shock to her unsuspecting hoof. Once released, Sweetie Belle immediately curled back under the covers.
"I told you not to go jumping in the lake with those friends of yours!"
Rarity huffed, again having to lift up the covers with her horn, just so she could see her sister's face.
"Now look what's happened."
Sweetie Belle gave her the most pitiful look Rarity had ever seen, and the elder unicorn sighed.
"Well, there's no way you're going to school like this."
And Sweetie Belle at least had the decency to hide her pleased smile in her hoofs.
"I'm going to make you something to eat, and you'll be staying in bed all day so you get better. Do you understand me, young lady?"
"Yes, Rarity,"
Sweetie Belle chimed, and if it weren't for the following coughing fit, Rarity may have scolded her further for looking so pleased about her day off. Rarity eyed the bundle until it sneezed, and then left the room. If there was one thing Rarity could admire, was that less than perfect at, it was parenting. Sweetie Belle was easy enough to get along with. All she ever really needed was someone to wake her up in time for school and to keep her company when she wasn't out with her fellow crusaders. But she had never been sick before. Sick! How was she supposed to deal with all of this?
"Think, Rarity,"
she said aloud to herself, standing in the kitchen, magically going through her drawers to find a cookbook. There had to be something completely perfect for curing a cold. It couldn't be that bad, could it? Rarity flicked through the pages of the book.
"No."
For chocolate cake.
"No."
For pumpkin pie.
"No."
For the daisy sandwich.
"No."
And no for a vegetable soup.
"Yes, of course!"
Rarity cheered, shaking her mane, quite pleased with herself. Vegetable soup. It was perfect. Warm, hearty, and filling. Smug had their evidently perfect choice in a meal. Rarity began to assemble all of the necessary ingredients. She wasn't a star chef, but she wasn't as catastrophic as Pinkie Pie could be. Rarity's kitchen stocked at the basics, and she could make and she could make them work. Thankfully, all the ingredients for her recipe were quite common. It was essentially just vegetables and some stock. And even luckier for her, the steps were simple. Throw it all in one pot, turn it on, and cook it. Maybe this whole parenting business was easier than she thought. Rarity took a moment to check herself in the kitchen mirror. What heathen household did not contain a mirror in every room, after all? Before there came a knock at the door. Tossing her hair, Rarity flashed the mirror an image of a smile before she was going to answer it. Though the carousel boutique was closed, she did a regular house call every morning. Rarity opened up the door just as she reached the landing.
Good morning, girls.
Scootaloo sat on her scooter, and Applebloom had just had her hoof raised to knock on the door again.
Oh, hey there, Rarity.
The youngest of the Apple family drawled.
We were just looking for Sweetie Belle.
Scootaloo emphasized that point by flying up and trying to look around over Rarity's body.
I'm sorry, Sweetie Belle is ill.
Rarity said, watching as Scootaloo, disappointedly, dropped back to the ground.
Well, will she be better tomorrow?
Applebloom asked, twisting her hoof in the dirt. Rarity cringed. How could any pony do that to their body? Even as a child, she should have greater appreciation for herself. Must be Applejack's teaching. That silly pony would rather go out in the dirt than get a manicure. And the very thought of it made Rarity shudder.
If she gets enough rest today, she should be,
Rarity said, not actually sure how long it would take for one of these sort of things to clear themselves up. On top of Sweetie Belle having never been sick before, Rarity hadn't either. Going into the water was far too uncouth for her. Parading swimsuits, by the way, however, was not. And during the winter season, she had an almost constant attachment to sanitizer.
Okay,
Scootaloo chimed, brightening up at the knowledge.
come on, Applebloom.
She tossed her head in the direction of the trailer attached to her scooter. Applebloom had hopped back into place, looking strangely lonely without Sweetie Belle beside her.
Tell Sweetie Belle to get better.
Rarity smiled at them both.
I will. Have a nice day at school, girls.
See you later, Rarity.
Scootaloo yelled, firing up her wings, and they were both off before Applebloom had a chance to do more than wave. Rarity carried her work upstairs so that she could continue cutting out her new design. Soon enough, the entire top floor filled up with the homely smell of soup, and Rarity found her own stomach growling in anticipation. No noise had come from Sweetie Belle's room, and the bundle under the covers hadn't moved the many times Rarity had been in to check on her. Opal had, at one point, gone in to sleep on Sweetie Belle's bed, but had apparently been dislodged by a violent sneeze and left. Her sulking down the hall had not gone unnoticed.
Sweetie Belle.
Rarity knocked on the still open door with her back hoof, watching as the lump under the covers jumped up.
I brought you something to eat. Come on.
2 bowls floated behind Rarity, steam coiling up from the broth within. Sweetie Belle had poked her head out from under the covers, ears drawn against her skull.
I'm not that hungry.
She said, sheepishly looking down at her hooves. Rarity tisked.
Now, you'll feel much better once you eat.
1 bowl floated over to hover in front of Sweetie Belle. The other followed Rarity as she climbed up to her sister's bed.
Come on, I'll eat with you.
That thought, at least, made Sweetie Belle perk up. She sat up in her bed, taking control of her bowl to hold it in front of her face. Though her magic wasn't as good as Rarity's yet, Sweetie Belle was able to hold up the most small items within a few meters of her own body. Anything beyond that was just a work in progress. Once Rarity had arranged herself, comfortably lounging on the small unicorn-sized bed, Sweetie Belle came to curl up next to her. Rarity smiled to herself, nudging the back of Sweetie Belle's head with her muzzle, their horns briefly touching. Sweetie Belle snuggled further into her.
Now, eat up.
Rarity instructed, pleased to hear her quiet slurping noise coming from beside her. The 2 balls soon came to a rest on the table beside Sweetie Belle's bed, one empty and one mostly empty. Sweetie Belle rolled over again so she could face Rarity, meeting her older sister's glance with a hopeful look.
Rarity?
Sweetie Belle began, her tone long and lilting. Rarity raised a wary eyebrow.
Could you... I mean...
Sweetie Belle looked away, as if embarrassed, before gathering her resolve.
Could you tell me a story?
She obviously lacked the confidence to say that it at a decent audible level, so Rarity took a minute to decode the rushed mash of words.
What? Well, I suppose so.
Rarity said, brow furrowing. She didn't know any stories. Sweetie Belle had never asked her for one before, but with how she looked into her eyes, awkwardly hopeful, how could Rarity say no? As if that wasn't enough, Sweetie Belle proceeded to sneeze everywhere, groaning miserably afterwards. So, stories. This was probably something more down Twilight's Avenue. She did live in the library, after all. The only books that Rarity ever read were fashion-related, and as much as Sweetie Belle tried to help her with the boutique, she doubted her sister would care for what Sapphire Shores had been wearing at her latest concert. Rarity cleared her throat at last, tossing her mane with a plump.
I'll tell you about a very special pony who lived on the Nile River.
If at all possible, Sweetie Belle's eyes grew, and she stared up at Rarity with enthusiasm.
So, there was a very special pony, and her name was Sealight. She wasn't a young filly like you. She was a big, grown-up mare, but there was something different about her. She didn't have a cutie mark.
Though Rarity's start was awkward and jilted, Sweetie Belle still lashed onto her every word, grasping at her cutie mark of her fictional heroine, or lack thereof.
And all the other ponies on the river used to make fun of her. They used to call her names.
Like blank.
Sweetie Belle chimed in, excited to contribute before realizing that she herself was lacking her cutie mark.
Yes, of course, just like that.
Rarity nodded before continuing.
And so Sealight lived up on a hill, away from the river. She only left to go get food from the market, and even then she wore a cloak to keep the other ponies from spotting her. It wasn't a very nice cloak either.
Rarity added, shaking her head and scrunching up her nose before getting back on track.
And so one day, Sealight was up in her house, and it started to rain. It rained and rained for a whole 3 days. This pony had always loved the rain and water, but she was simply too afraid to go out and play in the river with all the other ponies. On the 3rd day of the raining, Sealight heard some neighing outside. She peeked out her front door, keeping her rump hidden.
At this moment, Rarity flicked her tail over Sweetie Belle's flank, almost teasingly. The younger unicorn blushed, shuffling on the bed. She made a point of prodding Rarity with a hoof to get her sister back on topic.
Once she went outside, she realized all the other ponies in town were in trouble because the Nile River had started to overflow.
Sweetie Belle gave an appropriate gasp at that moment.
In the river she spotted a tiny head, but it kept getting pulled under the water. There were some Pegasus flying over trying to help, but the wind in the storm was too strong for them to fight. At that moment she forgot about her missing cutie mark and she ran down to the river. None of the other ponies noticed that she jumped in the river, swimming out to go save the young filly.
As the story went on, Rarity almost began to believe in it herself, gesturing elaborately to enthrall Sweetie Belle.
She was such a strong swimmer, even though she'd never been brave enough to do so before. In a few minutes she had gotten to the filly and picked her up onto her back, swimming her over to the shore. All of the ponies started to cheer as soon as she came out, gathering around her and the saved filly. "Thank you so much," said one of the ponies, the mother of the small filly who had been saved. "That's okay," said Sealight sheepishly as she started to go back away from the group of ponies. When she turned around to find a way out, though, she noticed that there was something special on her flank. Rarity said, and Sweetie Belle jumped to her feet.
Her cutie mark! Her cutie mark!
She proclaimed, bouncing on the bed. Rarity smiled.
"Yes, it was her cutie mark,"
he said, placating the excited filly.
"It was a picture of waves with a star in the very middle, and when all the other ponies saw it, they were jealous of how beautiful her cutie mark was."
Sweetie Belle's eyes were sparkling excitedly, and she sent a curious gaze down her own flank, just in case. The older of the two sighed.
Sweetie Belle, dear, do you understand the point of the story?
It means that you have to take risks to get your cutie mark.
Sweetie Belle started up her bouncing again, but at Rarity's skeptical look, she paused.
Right?
Not exactly, sweetie.
Rarity said, as carefully as she could.
It just means that you have to wait and your cutie mark will come.
But I don't want to be old when I get mine.
Sweetie Belle whined, dropping her head.
I'll have to live up on a hill then.
I bet you won't be old, nor will you have to live up on a hill.
Rarity assured her with a smile, nuzzling her. Sweetie Belle returned the gesture, though she still looked disappointed. Whether that was from missing the point of the story or the realization she might be old by the time she got her cutie mark, Rarity didn't know.
How about you come downstairs with me and help me work on some new designs?
Rarity said at last. Sweetie Belle was probably the clumsiest of helpers. Even opalescence was more helpful, and most of what she did was sleep. But seeing her bounce up on the bed, illness but all but forgotten, Rarity really didn't mind.
Yes, yes, yes!
Sweetie Belle chimed, jumping off the bed and running off down the hall. Rarity followed slower, stretching out her cramped legs. Sweetie Belle appeared in the doorway, shifting from hoof to hoof.
Come on, Rarity!
Coming!
Rarity said, ensuring that her mane and tail were in order before following her sister out into the hall.
I want to draw a dress, and I want to help you cut the fabrics. Can I help you cut? And can I pick up the colors? Oh, please, Rarity, can I?
The end.